Yo, JD here, and as you can see, we are back on F1 24 today. And I thought, why not in today's video actually test out the wheel, but then also the controller. If you didn't know, I used to be a controller player for about 7 to 8 years at competitive level, qualified for F1 esports using the controller, so I feel like I've got a fairly good experience of it. Obviously, this new handling model, it's been quite controversial in terms of how people like it, how they dislike it. For me, although it's very unrealistic, it actually seems to provide actually quite good racing. So the online lobbies have actually been quite fun so far. But of course, with the twitchiness, the front over rotating, it's very interesting to see which one actually feels better. Naturally, I'm going to be faster with the wheel because that's the device I've been using for quite a few years now. But usually in the past, a controller, you can actually get up to speed much quicker than you would do with a wheel. So with this handling model, I'm very interested to see how fast or how close I can get with the controller. So I've downloaded the world record setup here at Silverstone because I think this is another good track where high speed, low speed corners, going from that lock to lock is very important. Because if we actually go out on track now, and I'll just show you very quickly. So one of the biggest differences with the wheel and controller is the inbuilt linearity, steering linearity, the lock to lock. So with the wheel, you can go as fast as you want, and it's going to match basically what you do. So there's no kind of stopping in the middle and then turning again. You have complete free range. Whereas with the controller, full lock to left, full lock to right. So I'm going to do it as fast as possible from right to left. You notice in the middle, there's that tiny pause, and what that is an inbuilt steering assist. So the faster you're going, the slower the lock goes, because if you had full access to lock like you do with the wheel, you can see how much faster you can go with the wheel from right to left. With the controller, it's so much slower, because if you had that full access, you're just not going to be able to control it. You're going to be spinning 360, so you kind of have that built-in linearity, which is absolutely necessary. The same for the traction as well. So let's see what the pros and cons are. I'll get back to you after this. After I say a good lap with the wheel, a good lap with the controller, we'll break it down between the two and then take it from there. But as always, please let me know what you think, what device you're using, how it feels for you, and I'll get back to you once I've done some good laps here. Peace. Yo, JD here. And as you heard by my little live explanation there, some of the differences between the wheel and the controller. And as I mentioned, I will be going faster with the wheel, and just to really get straight to it, I always believe the wheel will always be the faster device when it comes to the official F1 games. Purely for the matter is that you can just control that rotation, you can control the speed of that lock to lock, as I demonstrated there. There is no linearity, there is no input wheel delay or anything of that at all. You have full reins of control, which is also the advantage and disadvantage of using the wheel, in my opinion. Is obviously the advantage is that you can correct mistakes, you can get the perfect amount of lock, you can adjust it mid-corner, and then you can change direction very quickly. However, as you're about to see go through into here, it's very easy to over-rotate and actually commit too much steering lock, because if you actually go past the limit, you're either going to get understeer, and as you've seen in this game, you're going to be getting a lot of oversteer as well. Another thing I would say with the wheel is obviously you're using your pedals rather than your fingers for the throttle and braking. I'd say you probably have more range of control with the pedals again, and if you're using like V3s like me, if you're playing games like iRacing, things like that, you actually have a bit of vibration, a bit of force feedback at times, but for the most part, you actually don't. So pros and cons, you have the full range of control, but then you might not have the feedback that you would get from the triggers if you were using the controller. But you're about to go into this corner, the over rotation thing again, it's incredibly easy to over rotate the car. So this is actually my best lap that I did with the wheel here. And again, I think if you look at esports, there's some very good controller players on this game. But the wheel, whatever you do, is going to be mirrored within the game itself. And I just find it definitely easier to mirror what I'm doing with the steering inputs versus my pedal inputs. Because with a controller, obviously you're using your thumb as a joystick, and then you're using your fingers to do the throttle and braking. It's something that definitely takes a bit of time. And I think the perfect way I would describe the wheel and controller, having been a competitive controller player for many, many years, is that I would say with the controller, it's kind of like skiing versus snowboarding, if any of you have actually done that. Skiing, I think it is easier to learn initially, and this is what I would say with the controller. It's easier to learn initially. If you had no experience using either at all, you'll probably go get up to speed much faster or to a good level with the controller quicker. But then to master it, to get to your absolute potential, I think, wouldn't say necessarily is harder, but I think it takes a lot more time. Whereas with the wheel, I'd say it's more like snowboarding. It's very difficult at first. It's nothing like real life driving. But then once you do get used to it, I think you actually get to your potential quite quickly. So that's the way I would describe between the two. You can see, fairly happy with that lap. Nothing too crazy, but for 11 laps, I wasn't too unsatisfied with that. But now, you can see, we are going to be using the controller, and I think some tips to make this a much better experience. And you can already see what I'm feeling like from doing this. But of course, I haven't played a controller for competitively for many years now. So obviously, it's a new muscle memory you have to learn. But I would advise you to increase your steering linearity in the settings. So increase that all the way up to 30, maybe even 50. I also increased my steering rotation ratio as well when I was on the controller, all the way up to 500, like I did with the wheel, and that definitely made it a bit of a smoother experience. But you can see this is the issue with the controller. It's not that it's over rotating, it's just that it's really hard to be precise, because the way you want to drive with a controller, and when you reach a good level of it, is that you actually don't want to be going full lock to the left, full lock to the right. Because if you do that, as demonstrated at the start of this video, there's too much of a delay between lock to lock, and then you're just going to keep on over rotating the car. It's going to not stop turning in that direction you're doing locking. So actually, if you could go full lock to the left, you want to go about almost 50-60% of the lock in one direction, so not all the way. So you don't want to be going all the way to that full lock, because then it allows you to actually change direction quite quickly, and it's going to allow you to be a lot smoother. And I think with this, as you see in this footage here, in certain corners, I'd say medium speed corners, and when you're carrying good momentum, like going through this one here, which you probably won't get right on this occasion, but you can see Steve staved it quite well. Medium speed corners, I feel like it does actually a fairly good job, because the faster you go, the less lock you have available to you. And I think, again, that's one of the advantages of a controller, is that it doesn't allow you to actually turn too much, especially at high speed. So the faster you go, the less lock you have. You can't over rotate the car. So even if you're going full lock to the right, it's not going to actually do that in game. Whereas again, the disadvantage is that if you don't get that line right and you don't get that lock right, then yeah, it's pretty much difficult to recover. But you can see by the delta here, we actually got better traction, and I think that was one of the main things I noticed using controller than this one, with that built-in traction control. Because again, if you had the full access to that traction, so whatever you did with your finger, it's going to be mirrored. You're going to be getting almost 100% of the throttle instantly. So they have to kind of buff that a little bit, give it a little bit more of a linearity, a bit of a delay. And I think I definitely noticed, especially in the solid speed corners, that I was actually getting better traction. You can see on this lap here, almost within 3/10, within 6 laps with the controller. And I think that says, again, even though I haven't been on the controller for a while, but again, it's like these corners here where it's very easy to over rotate the car. You have to slow it down a little bit as well to get that precision. You've got to kind of forget what the steering wheel is doing in the game, because you can't go full lock with the controller, with the stick itself. So go over here, I'm only barely moving the joystick at all. If you do it too much, you can see immediately you're just over rotating. So to get that precision, that muscle memory, is something that takes a lot of time. But this is actually my fastest lap that I did a controller, albeit this wasn't really done in a huge amount of time. So I think obviously if you're playing this every single day, I do think you can be fairly competitive with the controller. But I would always say again that the wheel is going to be the faster device, because you could decide exactly how much steering lock you have. You can control that steering lock, you can control that over rotation. Whereas when you're using a controller again, you can't go full lock to left, full lock to the right, because then it's just going to purely over rotate. And when you're going through the corners like this, I'm trying to bring the joystick back to the middle. So at this point here, even before like 50% into the corner, I'm trying to bring it back towards being straight, because there's a delay from when it continues to turn to then going back to the middle like it saw at the start of this video. So like going through middle of these corners, I'm already, as soon as I turn in, I'm pretty much bringing that joystick back to the middle again. And that is something that just takes a long time to get used to. So especially for these corners, you can see it just wants to over rotate. If I just did a little bit too much lock on the steering wheel to the right, that's when it's going to be over rotating. And you can see that lap there, we weren't actually too far away. So I think the biggest plus with this, with the controller, is that when you do get the right lock, it's really good. It stops you from over rotating the car. And also the traction as well. You can see noticeably on certain corners, the traction was actually a little bit better than the wheel. But that was really my first impressions. And you can see we're 1.4 off the pace. I think we could easily get within a second. And obviously, if I've been playing this for years and years, I think you could actually be getting fairly close. But again, you're not going to have that precision like you do with the wheel. But if you raise the steering linearity, the rotation, it's certainly going to be a much better experience. And then for playing it for only about 20 minutes or so, got up to speed actually fairly quickly. And you just need to learn to not go that full lock to the left and that full lock to the right. But please let me know your thoughts if you've used both devices. If you've been using the wheel, how does it feel for you? If you've been using a controller, how does it feel for you? Thank you so much, and I'll be catching you very, very soon. Peace.